This is the mountain range that my parents live on. In fact, they live right here. And this is a video about how I made it. I don't want to be one of those people who you go over to their house for dinner and they cook this amazing meal and then you're like, how did you make it? And they're like, oh, it's so easy. You just do these 50,000 things that you need a whole bunch of expertise to figure out how to do yourself. But this project, due in large part to the fact that I wasn't inventing a new process or anything, I was just using some of the existing tools that other people have made and learning from people who know how to use them. Shout out to my friend Bobby. This project was way more straightforward than I expected. I created this piece start to finish in about 24 hours, which was partly a lot of luck. Because when you're CNCing stuff, things can go wrong instantly, catastrophically, and then your entire chunk of wood is just shattered. But when you're building stuff, sometimes, very rarely, things just work out. And this is one of those times, so I thought I'd make a little video about it because it's so cool to turn the mountain range that your parents live on into a cheese board. Where do you put the cheese? Well, you put the cheese in the valley.
Feels like I want to put a lot of cheese on this thing.
Step one was going to this cool website called Touch Terrain. Who made Touch Terrain? Which looks like it was made by some gems at Iowa State. And you just type in the address or location that you want, and then what size is the block of wood that you want to carve this out of. And it kind of just spits out a beautiful 3D model. And I went back and forth a few times here because what I realized was my parents' house feels like it's on this mountaintop overlooking the valley. But behind the house, you can see this mountain range that they're on. And the coolest thing about this project to me is that this cheese board shows that the mountains behind them are so much bigger than the mountain that they're on that it makes their little tiny mountain look like a ripple that's almost on the valley floor itself. And I love making pieces of art that give us more of a sense of context on where we are in this world, especially when that context is just showing how small we are. So then I brought the 3D model into Blender to thicken the base a little bit and to decimate it down because the file that's exported by Touch Terrain has so much detail in it, and you really don't need that if you're just going to CNC it. And the first time I tried to bring the 3D model into my CNC software, it crashed the program. So I took it from 70 megabytes down to 2 megabytes just by using the decimate modifier. And then we brought it into the CNC software and we designed 2 tool paths. A tool path is just a set of instructions telling the CNC where to move the drill bit, the router, as it goes back and forth. Next, we had to figure out how to actually get my chunk of wood locked in place in the CNC so that it wouldn't move around, so that it wouldn't flip up when the router goes through it. And this is tricky. In the past, I've nailed or screwed straight through the block of wood to keep it locked down. But in this case, I wanted to use the whole block of wood. So I cut 2 L-shaped pieces of wood to hold in 2 of the corners. But the first time that we nailed those L shapes of wood down, we couldn't get enough tension on the second one to keep my block of walnut stuck, probably just by pushing. So Bobby watched another YouTube video and realized that we could make a simple lever out of another piece of wood where if we pull that lever against one of the L's, then that would help us create a ton of tension. So I pulled the lever against the L and then we nailed the second L down. Now our block of wood was in place and we just needed to what's called zero out the axes. So a CNC has an X, Y, and a Z axis. We need to tell the computer where 0, 0, 0 is, and then it would start cutting down and across from there. And the first pass is the roughing pass, where the CNC is just trying to take out a ton of material, but it's not trying to show any of the topography in a precise way. The main point is just to remove as much material as possible. And then the second pass is called the finishing pass, where the drill bit is actually moving up and down on the Z-axis with a lot of precision. The roughing pass took about 5 hours and the finishing pass took an hour because a lot less material was being removed on the finishing pass. What I noticed was that after the finishing pass, there were all these fluffy, woody hairs that were left from the wood grain, and also the bit left these lines everywhere that it moved. And that turned out to be a problem because of what's called the step over distance. So when the bit goes down the wood block in a line, then it'll move forward a little bit and go back and keep cutting, and then move forward a little bit and then go back and keep cutting. And how much it moves forward each time is called the step over distance. And the first time, my step over distance was 50% of the width of the bit, and I was using a 1/8 of an inch bit. And that was such a big jump that it was leaving these ridge lines that I really didn't like the look of because it distracted from the actual ridge lines of the mountain range. So we made the step over distance way smaller. We made it 1/100th of an inch. So every time the bit went along, it barely imperceptibly moved forward. And then it went back and barely imperceptibly moved forward. So we ended up doing this third pass. But when we started that final finishing pass, I realized that it wasn't actually cutting in at all. It wasn't solving the ridgeline problem. So we actually had to lower the z-axis and cut just a tiny little bit of extra material out and then restart that one again. All up, I think this is about 12 hours on the machine. And there was one terrifying moment in the middle where I'd been in the studio for 7 hours and I just had to go home. And I thought, God, I hope the computer doesn't turn off. Or I hope someone else doesn't come in here and use it. Because one of the trickiest things with CNCing is the computer doesn't know where your block of wood is. You have to tell it where your block of wood is. And if anything shifts at all, then all of this work is totally for naught, and this beautiful block of wood is turned into garbage. So it's one of these things where if everything goes right, it's a total joy, but there's a million things can go wrong, and I was really, really nervous. But sometimes when you're making stuff, you just get lucky. And then I just needed to manually chip off some of the extra material that I hadn't aligned properly, and I used a chisel for that. And then I manually sanded with a really fine grit sandpaper to get any of the final hairies off. And then I used this butcher block conditioner. That was crazy, because that just like totally brought out all the color of the wood. My favorite thing about digital fabrication, or just using computers to make stuff, is that computers allow you to make things that would take forever or be completely impossible by hand, and they make that easy, but they never do everything themselves, and there's always things that you have to go in and figure out manually and trim and clean and polish. And I love that messiness, because it's, unless you're doing mass manufacturing and the whole production line is locked down, any digital fabrication process is going to have things that go wrong, are misaligned, need to be sanded, need to be chiseled right at the end. I really like having to get in there, working with the material, taking something that was completely impossible for me to make with my hands, but also impossible for the computer to make on its own. And together, we can go make this beautiful thing. There are lots of maker spaces in most cities where you can get access to CNCs like this. And I'll pop a link below to Touch Terrain, because I think it is such a cool, totally free web app for making 3D models. And leave me a comment if you have any questions about any of this process. It was surprisingly straightforward, but could have gone wrong 1,000 ways, 1,000 times. I don't know what Mom and Dad are going to serve on this, but my partner did this cool project last year where she used Touch Terrain to 3D print molds of the landscape where cocoa beans were grown to cast chocolate bars out of those beans, so that you could literally eat the land that the beans were grown on. And I think there's something so fun about like having that connection back to food and land. Like, what if Mom and Dad serve cheese that's made by cows that are in the valley? We're all made of this. We're made of land, we're made of earth, we're made of carbon, and there's something quite humbling and also inspiring to me about that.